Before we get started with the video, I wanted to give a shout out to Shambhala Publications, who are distributed through Penguin Random House. They have partnered with the Humble Bundle to bring forth an amazing collection of books aimed at helping you understand the philosophy and achieve the mindset of a samurai in feudal Japan. For those of you who don't know, the Humble Bundle is a place where you can give charitable donations to receive all sorts of amazing offers on games, books, and more. This samurai collection includes books such as the Hagakure and the Art of War, but also graphic novels, as well as books about various martial arts. This bundle of 24 books is perfect for anyone trying to invest themselves into the world of the samurai and feudal Japanese warfare. I received this collection for free from Shambhala Publications, and I can tell you just how much of an amazing deal it is for the amount of content you receive with it. The bundle itself is available worldwide for just another few days, up until the 25th of November. So I would act fast if you want to secure this assortment of books before the offer ends. You can find a link below to where you can get yourself this amazing samurai book collection. And with that said, let's get on to the video. In the last episode, Tokugawa Ieyasu began his march back west to meet Ishida Mitsunari's army in the field. However, it aims to also cut off any hostile military actions by the Sanada clan of Ueda. He would send his son, Tokugawa Hidetada, up along the Nakasendo to mask the castle before continuing to link up with the main Tokugawa army. In the end, Hidetada would decide to go glory hunting and aims to capture Ueda from the legendary Sanada Masayuki, who would defend the stronghold against every attempt Hidetada would make. Now, with Ieyasu's army nearing the central region, the forces of the east and west are set to clash in a brief skirmish before their ultimate confrontation. By August of 1600, Gifu Castle was under threat by the Eastern Army, as Ieyasu's vanguard forces had moved up the Tokaido to secure the way for the arrival of the Tokugawa main body. Figures such as Fukushima Masanori and Ikeda Terumasa were leading the bulk of this attack. But across the frontier, we see the further advance of other Eastern Army generals such as Honda Tadakatsu, Ii Naomasa, Kuroda Nagamasa, and Hosokawa Tadaoki. With their presence in the region, the road was made clear for Ieyasu. Inside Gifu, Oda Hidenobu, the grandson of Nobunaga and current head of the Oda family, had taken up with Ishida Mitsunari's Western Army of Toyotomi loyalists. But now, in the face of the incoming tide from the east, it was looking like he would be swallowed up by the Tokugawa advance. In anticipation for the attack, Hidenobu had sent out detachments of troops to hold off the enemy, and while their entrenched positions did manage to slow the march of Masanori's troops, Terumasa, on the other hand, broke through and caused Hidenobu to fall back into the safety of the castle, as Fukushima and Ikeda forces were able to link up. Quickly, Hidenobu would send out word to the nearby Western Army strongholds at Ogaki and Inuyama requesting aid. In fact, it is suggested that by this point, Hidenobu was still rather confident that he would not only be able to hold off against a siege of the castle, but also, with the Western Army reinforcements, be able to trap and crush the Tokugawa vanguard. Yet that was simply not the case. In aims to press on Gifu before a solid defensive bulwark could be built up, Eastern Army forces began assaulting Hidenobu's last forward detachments before finally pushing up towards the castle itself. Reinforcements had not arrived in time, and soon Hidenobu's garrison was depleted to the last few men as he had tried desperately to defend. In the end, by August 23rd, after a series of fierce engagements, Hidenobu would surrender the castle. The fall of Gifu was a hard yet inevitable blow to the Western Army, as now one of its most significant defensive positions had been cleared, allowing Ieyasu to advance uncontested and poised to march deep into the area of Kyoto and Osaka, just to the west. By October, Ieyasu had finally arrived in Mino province, while Mitsunari and the Western Army had positioned themselves at Ogaki, watching the developments of the Eastern forces as they formed up. And although Ogaki was a strong position for the Western Army to hold up, in the face of the Tokugawa advance, it was not the most logistically smart location. It was actually off the road and could simply be masked and bypassed if Ieyasu wished, which then left the question to the Western Army High Command. Do they abandon Ogaki and fall back to defend Mitsunari's stronghold at Sawayama, or do they try to make a move here and now? There was no simple answer, but there would be several options presented. Ieyasu had established his position at Akasaka, a strategic point on the opposite bank downstream along the Kuisei River from Ogaki. Because of this, many in the Western Army camp believed that Ieyasu might actually intend to attack them, but no one could really tell, and the threat of him bypassing the position was still highly likely. Finally, by the 20th of October, Shima Sakon, one of Mitsunari's top strategists, came to him with the idea of launching a small probing raid to test the strength of the Eastern Army's position, to which Mitsunari agreed. Sakon, then with 500 men and accompanied by Akashi Masataka, with an additional 800, set out for Akasaka. Before crossing the Kuisegawa, Sakon split his forces in two, leaving one half behind on the Western Army side of the river before crossing with the other half. Once the raid had begun, he was quickly confronted with forces of the Tokugawa general Nakamura Kazuuji. It is recorded that right as fighting had commenced, Ieyasu had just been sitting down to lunch. However, once he was alerted of the clash, he took his meal to the highest point he could so that he could watch while he ate. Sakon's forces were quickly becoming overrun, and Ieyasu was even said to have commended Kazuuji for his quick response to the attack. Yet, this was all part of Sakon's plan. Falling back to his side of the river, Kazuuji's troops gave chase over the bridge and quickly then became set upon by the secondary detachment that Sakon had left behind in ambush. Ieyasu is then said to have retracted his earlier praise by then saying that they had obviously been fooled by Sakon's scheme. Things were now looking bleak for the Eastern Army forces that now found themselves caught on the wrong side of the river. But soon enough, their savior would arrive. Honda Tadakatsu, one of Ieyasu's greatest commanders and warriors, personally led a relief force to counterattack Sakon's ambush, while Kazuuji and the other Tokugawa soldiers could make their escape. In the end, Tadakatsu would hold the line against the Western Army tide, long enough for his allies to flee back across the Kuisegawa. Yet their attempts to do so must have been very difficult, as in the chaos of the battle, the bridge had been destroyed, leaving many to have to find another way to cross or even try to swim. With the majority of the surviving soldiers having retreated, Tadakatsu fell back, allowing Sakon and the Western Army to start counting heads. It was a complete Western Army victory that went great lengths to bolster their morale if accomplishing little else. But if anything, Ieyasu and his generals would not be fooled again into being lured across the river into a death trap. Although the question still remained, what would be the fate of Ogaki? In particular, what was Ieyasu to do? Was he actually about to dig himself into a full attack on the castle, or was he simply going to move around it? The victory of the attack at the Kuisegawa had at least proven one thing. The judgment of the Tokugawa generals and soldiers was, at the moment, poor, and several Western Army commanders had taken note of this, prominently Shimazu Yoshihiro and Ukita Hidei. In aims to help provide a suitable answer for the Western Army's next course of action, Yoshihiro later that evening came to Mitsunari with a plan, a night attack on the Tokugawa army. Along with having witnessed the display of the Eastern Army soldiers during the fight that day, Yoshihiro had also been observing the status of the rest of the Eastern Army soldiers, and it was his assessment that they were currently exhausted from their long march along the Tokaido. Many of them had been living in their armor for weeks and were in need of rest and refreshment. Yoshihiro argued that a coordinated night attack on the Tokugawa army would not only take them by complete surprise after the attack that had already occurred that day, but also would go far to completely shatter the will of the Eastern Army. Ukita Hidei additionally chimed in, agreeing with Yoshihiro's assessment and calling for the attack to happen. It was here that probably the most important decision in Mitsunari's life up until that point fell before him. Given what we know now in retrospect regarding the status of the Western Army and what would eventually transpire over the course of the coming battle, Had Mitsunari actually gone forth with the plan, it might have actually been a massive success in turning the tables against Tokugawa Ieyasu. But instead, Yoshihiro's plan was met with doubt. There are several suggestions as to what was said during this meeting, with some saying it was Sakon who spoke out against the plan, and others saying it actually came down to Mitsunari. In all truth, I believe it was probably a mixture of both. Mitsunari was still likely very nervous about making the wrong decision, and a night attack was perhaps the riskiest thing he could do at the moment. On top of that, other generals like Sakon were firm believers that with the numbers they had, the Western Army would easily be able to win the battle in the field. It was obvious that he probably had little to no knowledge or belief that so many of his allies would in the end betray them. And additionally, there is also speculation that perhaps Sakon or Mitsunari called the idea of a night attack cowardly, perhaps to bolster their own belief in a proper field battle. But I tend to doubt that anyone considered a night attack cowardly, especially since samurai had been using night attacks for hundreds of years. All in all, Mitsunari would shoot down Yoshihiro's suggestion. But during the course of the conversation, someone had said something wrong. Either it was Sakon's comments about the idea, or Mitsunari's own dismissal of the idea. Whatever the case, Yoshihiro came away from the meeting feeling very insulted by the way things happened and what was said. Perhaps someone actually did stupidly suggest that the idea was cowardly, thus insinuating that Yoshihiro was cowardly for suggesting it. This would have major ramifications, as Yoshihiro's later actions during the battle would now be affected by this very event. It is here I also want to take a brief moment to advocate for Shimazu Yoshihiro, along with Ukita Hideye, who was said to have supported his idea. Both Yoshihiro and Hideye were veterans and proven commanders who had experienced a lifetime of war. Yoshihiro throughout the many Shimazu campaigns throughout Kyushu, and both of them heavily throughout the invasions of Korea. I would believe that their combined military experience far outweighed that of Mitsunari and Sakon. In fact, we are already very well aware that Mitsunari was not someone who was the slightest bit militarily gifted. And while Sakon was known to be a respected and highly sought-after strategist, it is hard to say if his actual experience was really better than these two veterans. It is easy to see why Mitsunari doubted them. He definitely had more trust in his friend Sakon, and was also nervous about making the wrong move or being bypassed. But that doesn't mean he made the right call or assessment. This is one of the rare times where I will say, if I was there in Mitsunari's position, I would have listened to those who were known to have greater experience. There is a reason why Shimazu Yoshihiro's entire military career is more remembered when thinking about him, while in the case of Shima Sakon, we tend to just remember him for the role he played in the lead-up to and at the Battle of Sekigahara. Yet, with that said, the decision Mitsunari would inevitably make would be one of precaution. In fear of potentially being bypassed, he would give in to the idea of relocating, sacrificing Ogaki Castle so that he could better stand in the way of Ieyasu and force him to meet him in the field. As for where he would move, it was decided that the ideal location was a spot where Kobayakawa Hideaki had established his forward position. A village located in a valley up along the Nakasendo, a village known as Sekigahara. So, what can we learn? By autumn of the year 1600, Gifu Castle had fallen to the advance of the Tokugawa vanguard, prompting Ishida Mitsunari and his western army to move up to Ogaki Castle in anticipation for the arrival of Ieyasu's main body. It was here by the 20th of October, after the arrival of the Tokugawa forces, that Shima Sakon would convince Mitsunari to allow him to lead a raid across the Kuisegawa to test the resolve of the Tokugawa army. The attack would be a success, but in the end it was one that was strategically insignificant. However, later that evening, Shimazu Yoshihiro would suggest a night attack on the Eastern Army after observing their exhausted state. But his idea would be dismissed, and in some way, Yoshihiro would be insulted, leaving him to question his motives in the coming battle. Mitsunari would inevitably decide to relocate further up along the Nakasendo to meet the Tokugawa army at a location known as Sekigahara. In the next episode, at last, the battle begins. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.